This is a really simple question. If you've got some evidence, f***ing charge me. Get on with it. Charge me now, you f***ing p***s.
That's a very upset Kenyon Clark.
You've got no evidence. And if you do, if you're stupid enough to, I'm going to eat you.
It's now 12 months since authorities raided his and wife Charlotte's home.
There was a whistleblower involved.
A whistleblower.
Yep.
12 months since Duval property was tipped into receivership.
This is a hugely complicated case,
Yep.
which in some respects hasn't been helped by the Clarks as well.
The investigation goes on. What do investors think?
Look, it was probably the worst investment I've personally made. You know, they were very good at selling.
So, what's next? Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. It's been a year since we launched the podcast, and it's been a year since the Financial Markets Authority conducted multiple raids on Duval offices, their lawyer, Owen Culleney, and others, and of course, the leased luxury Remuera home of Charlotte and Kenyon Clark.
By all accounts, they had arrived by 6:30 and actually scaled the wall, scaled the fence to get into the grounds, and then presumably walked the family up at that particular time.
That was senior NBR journalist Brent Melville recounting what happened that day. He was the first reporter on scene and broke the news of the fall from grace for the high-flying Clarks and their Duval property group.
We have just signed off on another $100 million of financing into Auckland. You know,
Both Kenyon and Charlotte were regular posters and boasters about the success of what they claimed was a $600 million company.
that our goal is to build a multi-billion-dollar business.
They even commissioned a TV series about themselves.
At work, Kenyon is like a bull in a china store.
But after a couple of warnings from the Financial Markets Authority, Duval was tipped into receivership. So, what's happened since then?
It started off with a bang. It's been protracted. You know, I mean, these kind of investigations clearly take time.
Here's senior reporter Brent Melville again.
12 months on, I mean, we've been sitting in court for probably, upwards of a dozen instances.
Right. And in that time, just in the last year, how many stories have you written about Duval?
We have written over the course of we're tracking at about 2 stories per month, plus minus. So, we are sitting overall, I think, 75 stories.
In total coverage?
In total coverage.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay. So the FMA had already warned the Duval Group a couple of times previously about its sort of marketing practices around the wholesale investors.
Yeah.
But what changed? What prompted it to investigate, do you know, and then which led to the receivership? Do we have any insight into that?
Look, there were complaints coming through to the FMA, fundamentally in regard to how they were structuring their wholesale investment class. They weren't really checking the fine print on that one. That was a fundamental issue for them, particularly around their mortgage fund. Their mortgage fund had plus minus 70 investors by 2023. A lot of those were mum and dad investors who realistically had very little business being in the, investing money. And some of them were windfall, sell of a house,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they weren't sophisticated investors under the actual classification under the Act. So that stuff was coming to light.
Yeah.
Also, there was some advertising and promotional activities that they'd put together. They were warned about those. They then fought those in court, but they lost those. So they were under the gaze of the FMA for some time.
And was there or has there been any indication as to something that tips the FMA over into actually going in and raiding and putting them into receivership?
I don't think there was any single instance, but we do know that they were provided, there was a whistleblower involved.
A whistleblower.
Yep, and they had provided some information in the form of a hard drive to the FMA.
Right.
A lot of the information that we've gleaned through court cases redacted and suppressed, and we can't actually go into any finer detail.
So we don't know
that.
what's on that hard drive or any of those reasons.
We don't know. We know that it's got plus minus 14,000 documents on it. So they've gone through plus minus 1,200 of those to date.
To date.
So I guess you're getting an insight into how long it takes to go through this kind of process.
That's a lot of documents. One of the most unusual things about this is that pretty soon after the raid and then Duval being tipped into receivership, it was then placed into statutory management. How unusual is that?
It's very unusual in the New Zealand context. I think we counted 10 previous instances where it has actually occurred historically. The most kind of famous ones are Orangi investments with Hubbard.
Oh yes,
down in South Canterbury, Canterbury Finance.
Yep.
That eventually cost taxpayers, I think, upwards of $1.4 billion. In this case, it had gone before then Commerce Minister Andrew Bailey, who had indicated that one of the major reasons they pursued the statutory management route was because otherwise they were facing a number of different claims from different parties. So it was kind of a multiplicity of different claims coming from China Construction Bank, coming from other lenders, coming from investors, coming from shareholders and contractors. That was already happening. That was already shaping up through the interim receivership. So I think they decided to put it in the hands of one agency or one entity, as in PwC, and then take it forward from there.
Okay. Now, as you've indicated, like a lot of the stuff is redacted and suppressed during the court processes, but we do have like the statutory management reports. What has that told us about the shape of the companies, number of investors, the level of debts, or what's owed?
To date, this is in March. There's another report due in September, which is next month. Having said that, the last tally sits at about $320 million, of which about 64 million is owed to investors. There's a cross range of different money owing in different areas. So we're talking about 120 investors.
120 investors,
They rated between 120 and 150. Depending what you count, and there's a little bit of overlap between the different funds.
Well, let's talk about those funds. I mean, were there sort of like 2 or 3 major funds that these 120 or so investors were in?
The biggest fund is the mortgage fund.
The mortgage fund.
That was upwards of, I think that's sitting at about 70 investors, 68 to 70 investors. They tallied in, latest numbers that I've seen sits at about 50-odd million that had been invested on behalf of those investors. Okay, so there's a mortgage fund. Then there was the BTR, the Build-to-Rent Fund. Build-to-Rent Fund was a slightly different animal insofar as it only had about a sort of limited number of investors. I think it was 31 investors. They bought into, again, a wholesale investment, $250,000 minimum. They bought into 2 existing properties, which were then rented out at a return. In the end, the PwC's actually managed to sell that for $27 million, plus minus to $27.5 million to a consortium of investors, and backed by.
Is that what it was worth?
BNZ.
27 million.
They bought in at 17 million. China Construction Bank put in 17. It was a $34.5 million fund.
Right, so they've sold it at a discount.
They lost a bit.
Yep. Okay. Just finally, on the investors, you talked about targeting wholesale investors, but in reality, were these investors wholesale investors, or were they mums and dads are just going to lose out?
That's a call that the FMA probably has to make, and then hence we're going through the legal process at the moment. But from the people I've spoken to, a lot of these people were mum and dad investors who had received a bit of a windfall in the form of a house sale and decided they didn't know where to put their money. There was one case where a woman phoned me and she said, "Look, I moved into a retirement home. I've got $1.5 million that I've received from my home. I put $1.2 million of that into Duval." And now I can't really afford to buy my grandchildren any gift. So that's one of those kind of stories, but it's difficult for me to see how she would be classed as a wholesale investor.
One of the hardest things when you're starting out is to accept that you need to be able to lead into conflict. Everyone is focused on being nice and not upsetting other people. If that person ends up feeling upset or offended, well, that's really on them. You have to learn to be direct.
It wasn't so much to do with the Duval brand per se.
This is an investor in one of the Duval funds, the Build to Rent Fund. The buildings were already built and generating rent.
It was more for me personally an exposure to the Auckland property market across a great number of units and a nice stable cash return that was better than what I could achieve by buying just a one rental property. So it was, that was what attracted me to it myself.
He prefers to remain anonymous. And what was the amount that was required to get into it?
$250,000.
Okay. And you're known as what is a wholesale investor, aren't you? So that's somebody who has a lot of investment experience?
Well, this is one of the things. Looking back on it in hindsight, I don't believe I would actually qualify as a wholesale investor because I've learned a little bit more since signing up to Duval. So, yeah.
Okay. Did they advertise it as a wholesale investor? I mean, did the clerks tell you that you qualified?
It was their sales manager, Ben Good, who talked me through it and said that I was a wholesale investor.
Okay. Did you have any dealings directly with Kenyon or Charlotte?
Very little.
What were the promised returns? What attracted you to it so much? I mean, you talked about the return.
It was advertised as 8%. However, after the fund settled, it immediately dropped to 7% on the proviso that the board wanted to build up cash reserves. So 8% was never paid.
Right. And what about 7%? Did you get that?
Yes. So in the first year, I believe 7% was paid. And then in year 2, it's when it started dropping considerably.
Considerably.
It went to 4.5%. And then dividends stopped. And then they resumed shortly thereafter at about 2.something%.
In fact, the dividend dropped to 2.25%. What were you thinking when you saw this dividend dropping so much?
Well, I knew that it was a higher interest rate environment, and something that I overlooked was when I invested, I thought that the interest rate that had been secured with the bank was fixed, and it turns out that it wasn't fixed. But that's something that I overlooked in the due diligence phase.
Okay. Did you have a sense that things were not going well, though?
Once the dividends slowed down, it's caused me to start asking more questions. And it was around when the FMA started doing stuff with the wholesale investor certificates around October that I started to ask more questions or become a little bit more curious as to what I'd got myself into.
Right. Did you get any answers at the time?
It was all window dressing. Well, this is in hindsight. It was all window dressing, smoke and mirrors.
What was your reaction when you saw that the FMA had actually acted and raided the clerks and put everything into receivership?
I knew the FMA were looking into Duval. I didn't know that it was going to go that far. And I didn't even know what statutory management was until it happened, because it's not something I'd seen before.
Yeah, it's a rarely used tool here. Did that indicate to you that it was quite serious?
Absolutely, and I was definitely not expecting a police raid on a home or anything like that. I mean, I didn't know that the FMA did those sorts of things. I've not seen it before. I don't know if it's a common occurrence, but it's the first time I've seen it myself.
Okay. When you heard that news, what did you think was going to happen to your money then?
I had no idea.
Right.
Had no clue what was going to happen. I knew fundamentally that the BTR assets were somewhat more secured than the main line of their business because it was actually backed by something substantial and completed.
So it's a year on since that raid.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe that year for you?
It's been nothing. I'd long ago written off the investment as just a dud investment. I knew that there was issues with China Construction Bank because I knew that the facility ended after 3 years and that they hadn't secured refinance. So I knew the chickens were coming home to roost before the receivership had started, and then the statutory management.
So you were almost expecting some kind of unravelling.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. And then since the statutory management was put into place, what have you been doing? Have you been trying to get your money back, basically?
Well, I met a couple of the other BTR investors at one of the Duval lunches, and so we had kept in touch and whatnot. And then when this all happened, we were all trying to figure out a way to preserve our investment, and that was the sole focus. And a great deal of the investors all worked together to achieve an outcome that was suitable for all of us.
Does that mean you will get some, most, all of your money back now that you've got an outcome?
I can't speak to the nature of the deal, but it is the best outcome that we could have hoped for.
Have you tried to talk to the Clarks themselves in the past year?
No, definitely not.
And why is that?
I don't really feel like being lied to.
How would you describe, looking back with the benefit of hindsight, your experience investing in a Duval fund?
It was very, look, it was probably the worst investment I've personally made. And, but that's they were very good at selling. And yeah, sometimes you make good investments and sometimes you don't.
We should point out another set of investors in the Duval Property Group, led by Whangamata electrician Carl Linderman, took legal action against the Financial Markets Authority. They allege the FMA breached a duty of care because it didn't warn them ahead of placing Duval into receivership. That court case was unsuccessful.
I'm really cautious about spending time with people who are super ambitious, but they don't have the talent, they don't have the charisma, they're lazy. Those are the people that will stab you in your back. You need to be careful because there is genuine malevolence in this world.
Hi there, can we just pause for a minute? If you enjoy our regular episodes and independent journalism, please follow, download, or even share with your mates. Cheers. All right, let's get back to the Duval saga. So, what about the Clarks themselves, Charlotte and Kenyon? As you heard earlier, in a now deleted social post from 4 months ago, Kenyon has been defiant.
On day one of the raids on my home, I knew that what the FMA had done was unlawful.
Marking the anniversary of the raid, the Clarks have both posted on Instagram. This is Charlotte Clark, voiced by an NBR staff member.
It's hard to put into words what that moment was like for us, for our children, for our team, and for the people who have stood with us through every step since. These were private companies, not one consolidated entity, not publicly listed, and we weren't required to audit or combine them. We had multiple chartered accountants, both internal and external.
Kenyon Clark is pledging to reveal the truth, saying, quote, "This isn't regulation, it's state-sanctioned sabotage, the quiet tyranny of a bureaucratic Stasi. Reform is needed." How would you sum up their approach since the FMA took action?
I mean, their companies have been taken off them.
Yeah.
They're in personal receivership as well, which is pretty rare. Their passports were seized. We are now a year after the FMA's initial raid. charges still haven't been laid against them.
Hamish McNichol is co-editor of the NBR.
We sort of have some understanding of how complicated this all is. We have some understanding of why the FMA has been investigating them, but there's still no charges. And so Kenyon has sort of increasingly got more and more vocal again, and he's running this line of government overreach, FMA overreach, PwC destroying the value that was still in the business for nothing as yet, which... in fairness to him, there is a point there, but equally, when you look at the reports out of PwC, when you look at what publicly available information there is on why the FMA has been investigating, this is a hugely complicated case.
Yep.
And so, which in some respects hasn't been helped by the clerks as well. And so, he's, they're not handling it well.
No, okay. In terms of, you just mentioned it's a hugely complicated case, can we liken it to anything previous? Like, it was just taking a long time to investigate.
Yeah, so there was actually, in June, there was a 3-day hearing in the High Court, which was all about whether receivership orders on half a dozen entities and the clerks personally should continue. These were the entities that weren't put into statutory management but were put into receivership. And basically there was a big hearing about is it right that these entities are still in receivership, including the clerks themselves. And at that hearing, the clerk's lawyer, Ron Mansfield, made a big point about saying this is dragging on for ages, they still haven't faced any charges, what's going on? And the FMA's lawyer pointed out that actually this isn't unprecedented in terms of the length. So Mark Hodgson, the Hanover case, the investigation into him went for much longer than this is going on. So yes, it is, to you and I, a year feels like a long time. And they were actually investigating Duval for some period before the raids as well. But in the context of other sort of similar cases, Hodgson, Hanover was a big one as well. It's not entirely unusual.
Okay, all right. And if we look at the clerks themselves, I mean, they, pre the raid, they were very high profile. They posted about their lavish lifestyle. There was helicopters, private jets, shooting trips. But the court stepped in, allowing them to spend so much when they had everything seized. So how has life changed for them, it seems?
Well, they're still living in their rented Remuera house. They were granted $1,500 a week each in living expenses, which is pretty good. I don't know
well, it sounds okay.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So they definitely, maybe they've just wised up to stop posting about that stuff. They are... Kenyon's posts now are very much just him sort of cruising around, working out at home. He's tried to start a new business, like a mentoring business,
right?
Which I don't think is going very well. We're certainly not getting all these images of these big lavish trips again or anything like that. So it seems to have pared back a little bit. But they're still doing okay, I think.
They have been making claims about, not only has it been dragging on, but also they've used the word gagged quite a bit in the last year. Any substance to that? Gagged by the courts, I guess, is what they're saying.
Yeah, they're running this narrative that their side of the story hasn't been able to be told. Despite that, Kenyon still remains very active on social media. Yes. Charlotte as well, and increasingly so in the last couple of months as well. Quite aggressive towards PwC and John Fisk, the sort of lead receiver and statutory manager there as well. Really sort of homing in on him, his capability of running a property group and all this sort of stuff. So, I mean, I personally think the claims of being gagged are rubbish, really, because, they're welcome to say what they want at the moment, and it's just whether people believe them or not. And claims of government conspiracy and media conspiracy and all this sort of stuff, when you sort of cut through the noise of all of that and actually look at what he's facing here, so official documents out of the government, the receiver's reports, statutory manager reports, there's clearly substance to this claim. We don't know what it looks like just yet, but they're not taking these steps for no reason. We've also heard evidence in that June hearing I mentioned that the receivers have actually struggled to get Kenyon and Charlotte to front for interviews.
Right. Well, that will slow down the process.
Well, exactly. And so it's all very well and good saying, here we are a year later, we haven't been given anything to answer to, and yet there has been some evidence given of delays in getting an interview by the receivers and the FMA themselves as well. I understand there has been some progress made on that front now, but it is a little ironic to claim you're gagged while at the same time not fronting for an interview with the people who are looking into your business.
And at the same time being a frequent social
and at the
media
same time
poster.
being all over social media 24/7. Yeah.
The NBR podcast invited many people onto the show, including the Clarks. With legal action ongoing and receivers still investigating, no one wanted to appear. So let's go back to journalist Brent Melville for some final thoughts. What's next in this saga?
That's a good question. The investigation is ongoing. It's difficult to get a lot of information from the FMA as per it being an active kind of investigation. There is a court hearing on the 8th of August. We would expect, I think they've got a very strong case, and we would expect charges at some point.
Right.
We don't know when that might occur. But it's not unusual that it does take some time to get these things squared away.
And that wraps up our latest on Duval and the first year of the NBR podcast. We appreciate you listening. As usual, social media clips used are in the description, and thanks to senior content producer Joseph Hisayasu. For early access to new episodes, subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Up next, we feature a brand new NBR series, The Lawmakers. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.